Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You're on the Steady Coach. And it is always a huge celebration for me to bring you a success story. This one is special. It's special in several different ways. First of all, I know Ron personally and have known him for about a year and a half. He's been a member of my coaching group. He's been a mentor, and he's even been featured in a few of our mentor conversations that you've probably already seen here on YouTube. Ron also has a way of explaining and breaking down in detail his recovery process in ways that you've probably never heard before. So if you've ever been confused by what to do on a day-to-day level and what to do kind of on a more global level, Ron is going to explain this in a way that I think will make it much more applicable to your recovery journey right now. Now, Ron was originally diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome, despite his head injury occurring several months prior to developing the symptoms he did. And if we were to give him a diagnosis, it was probably PPPD, but as you know from my channel, the exact diagnosis isn't what matters. What matters is Ron was definitely dealing with a neural circuit dizziness problem, including, of course, dizziness, some disorientation, some depersonalization, and some other very unpleasant symptoms that he will describe in detail later in this interview. Now, again, I think you're going to learn a lot from this one. Ron's interview is very long. I actually thought about chopping it up into two, but I am presenting it to you in its entirety because I think you're going to be riveted and want to listen to it all the way through so you can learn from him. If you enjoy this, please leave questions and comments below. Let me know you like hearing success stories so I keep making them. I would also love it if you could like this video, share it with people who you think will enjoy it, subscribe to my channel if you're here on YouTube. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please consider leaving us a review, a 5-star rating, and following the podcast. All of these things help me reach more people and get this information to people who need it. Please enjoy this conversation with Ron. Ron, what a delight to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. I'm very grateful to be here.
Yes, and I think anyone listening to this is going to be grateful that you're here too, because as a small preview, I know some of the things you're going to talk about because I've heard you speak with such wisdom and clarity about them to other people who are recovering. So get ready, everyone. Put your seatbelts on, get comfortable. We are going to be here for a little while and you're going to learn a lot today. So
thank you.
Yes. Well, Ron, I would love for us to just start with the basics about you. Just for those who have not seen you in one of the mentor panels that we've done, could you just tell a little bit about yourself and what brought you to my channel in the first place?
Okay. My name is Ron. I'm married. I'm 71 years old. I live in Redmond, Washington in the US. I was formerly a software engineer, a lifelong motorcyclist, scuba diver, horseback rider. What brought me here was neural circuit dizziness. And we can describe what that was like. I actually have kind of an interesting story about that process of getting here. Other things about me that are probably interesting to know is I'm bringing kind of a lifelong interest in mindfulness and Zen. I'm also autistic, which has its own interesting lens on, I didn't learn this until about 20 years ago. So I grew up not knowing this. And so a lot of my experiences, now I can reflect back on, oh, that's what was going on. So it provides some interesting challenges and some interesting strengths. So we'll probably see those show up. So that's me.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm going to take you up on it and just ask, so what were the particulars of the neural circuit dizziness that got you here?
Okay, there's an interesting intro to this, which is, and light bulbs will probably go off as I say this. I was seeing a cognitive behavioral therapist for about 4 years before it started for anxiety. So
Okay.
interesting, you know. I was also taking notes. I'm a list maker. And so I was keeping notes of everything I wanted to talk about. And neural circuit dizziness developed while I was in this process. So I actually have an unintentional diary of onset, increase, what the symptoms were, what the doctor experience was. All of that got captured just inadvertently. I discovered it a couple of weeks ago.
Wow.
So I can describe. So I have it's not just my memory I'm relying on. I'm looking at what I wrote down. And so it started, I'm going to call them symptoms for now. Later, I'm going to leave that word behind. Symptoms started around Christmas 2021. And just going through my notes, I said, I think I'm not feeling so well. I think I have the flu or something. And in the next visit, I said, wow, I am really, really tired. This feels like almost chronic fatigue syndrome that I'd had earlier in my life. Like that level of tired. No spoons left. I'm not even making spoons. But that's all I was saying. And the fact that that's all I was saying tells me that that's all there was. And we would talk about other things, but slowly each week, the talk would become more and more about the sensations. And the first ones to show up were brain fog and dizziness. They kind of landed just on top of that fatigue. And there wasn't much we could say about it other than I could just report it and we talk about other things. And over the next couple of weeks, then more things. And I'll describe in detail more what they were, but I'm just the timeline now. More things about head pain, disequilibrium, confusion, migraine, increasing light and sound sensitivity. So I'll describe each of those things a little bit more, but that's the timeline, which I find kind of interesting, of exhaustion and then onset of all these things kind of at once. So the specifics of each of these things, I mentioned some of them. The dizziness, what that looked like is, tried to describe it in two different ways because it felt like slightly different experiences. One is that felt sense of dizziness in my head, like I'm not stable. I'm going to fall down if I try anything. And also the feeling of disequilibrium in my body. I tried to describe those separately. It still makes sense to me, but so the dizziness was just the constant feeling, don't try anything. And the disequilibrium is when I walk downstairs, I have to hold on to everything. When I take showers, I have to have both hands against the wall. I can't dress without sitting down. The thought of lifting up one leg to put in a pant, that's not going to happen. So that sense of dizziness, the brain fog. I don't know what you can say about brain fog. It's just I felt I couldn't remember my PIN. I couldn't remember what cabinet held which dishes were in which cabinet. I was always searching for things like that. A lot of confusion. My short-term memory my working set memory is just gone. Attention span was gone. Reading was very difficult. When you read a book and your mind wanders and you've read a page and you go, oh, I don't remember anything I read. That was what the experience was constantly. I could not remember the last sentence I'd read. Migraine. I've had migraines on and off all my life, but now they were 24. And by the way, the symptoms I'm describing are 24/7. These are not intermittent. So migraine and an unusual, I haven't heard anyone else describe this, the feeling of a bruised brain. I know the brain does not have nociceptors yet, I could feel the three-dimensional shape of my brain and the whole thing felt bruised. So just moving my head like this much would be excruciating. Felt like my head, like you have a bruise. So light and sound sensitivity. Now this, we actually get into some interesting crossovers with the autistic experience here. A lot of people understand about autism, kind of the social connectedness issues. I think not so many understand that what's possibly more important to the autistic people is sensory overload. That's just part of the experience. So hyperacusis, that's just been a lifelong thing with me. So specifically, that's like sensitivity to sound, and I include light in that. But the autistic part of that is the inability to filter it out. So it's not just sensitivity, like the sounds are louder. Every loud sound makes me jump, always has. But sounds like refrigerators running or fans running, I can't. I think the normal experience is that after a few minutes, your brain tunes it out. I can't tune it out. So I'm aware of every fan running, you get the idea. So that increased with the neural circuit dizziness. Also, there's kind of an interesting thing, a term I just learned about recently, monotropism. That means the inability to task switch very well, which turns out to be a common autistic experience. The normal experience is just kind of annoyance and difficulty. Okay, I'm taking out the trash and now suddenly I have to answer the door. It's just, now it became a source of just a major symptom surge. Like I'm doing one task, another task presents, and boom, symptoms go out the roof. So tinnitus, I've had that lifelong, but now it was like someone had cranked up the volume. Disoriented, it was still the driver, picking up things, doing the grocery shopping, and I was just terrified I was going to get lost because I was disoriented. So I would take multiple cell phones, multiple printed copies of the map and alternate routes. It was just kind of the sensation. And kind of the last one, which was actually my most fearsome one, was disassociation. So fortunately, this one wasn't 24/7, but it was often enough. And I don't know how to describe it. People who've had it understand it. I don't know how else to describe it. For me, the experience was, if you've seen Lord of the Rings and Frodo or Bilbo put on the ring and enter that wraith world that's just scary, sharp edges, out of focus, sharp noises. Whoever made that scene understood derealization. And that was my experience. It was quite scary. So
What a great metaphor. Oh my gosh. I'm just so glad that you mentioned that. I hope people are taking solace in realizing that there are other people who experience that.
Yeah, I have so much sympathy for like all of these, but for the few people who have derealization or any kind of disassociation, I get that. It actually makes it kind of difficult to work with the body when the body is not feeling the normal sensory information.
Yeah.
So
Can I ask about the disorientation for a moment? The reason is I know there's at least one person watching this who has felt so alone, because that is the primary symptom. And a lot of you out there feel like you're alone because the one symptom that you have that scares you the most is something no one else has talked about or hasn't really explained a lot about. So I'm just going to pause on the disorientation for a second and ask, so when you say disorientation while driving, do you mean that you would say get to maybe a familiar intersection and then just not be able to figure out where you were oriented, like where you were located, and not know which way you might need to turn? Or if you did turn, it would feel like you were going the other way? Is that what we're talking about?
Somewhat. It felt like, in a sense, that no familiar place was familiar. It's like the special fear was, oh my gosh, I'm going to encounter road construction and they're going to send me on a route that I've never been before, and I'll get lost and I'll never get home. And you can imagine the catastrophizing around it.
Sure.
But that was the experience. For people who are wondering though about the driving, for some reason I could focus. I could drill in. The light is green. The speed is this. There are pedestrians there. I felt able. I felt that I wasn't endangering anybody or in danger, and I could react to anything. But sure. I felt like I was always driving in a foreign place.
Yes. That's a great description. Thank you. And you can both be able to respond and be safe on the road, and also feel like you don't live in this reality. And so that's what sounds like what you're describing. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you for that. And before you go on, also, let me just back us up for just a moment. You mentioned that the symptoms came on somewhat gradually. At what point was the head injury? Where was that?
Wow, we're going to get into this, which is interesting.
Okay.
In fact, actually, we can talk about the timeline of, as we start to talk about the doctor visits, that timeline will be clear. But to answer that question directly, it was immediately before the fatigue.
Okay.
Which makes it about...
Fatigue, then the other symptoms got
it. So the neural circuit symptoms came about 3 months after a fall.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I hear that word interesting because it's interesting to me too.
It is interesting. Yes, I injured my brain, but somehow it had a delayed reaction. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
While seeing a cognitive behavioral therapist. Coincidence.
Yes. Yeah. Where you're digging up things or Okay. All right. Please go on. Yes.
Okay.
Wherever you are in your story, please.
Okay.
Continue.
So now it's time for what I've called the doctor go round. I think that a lot of us experience, and yes, I experienced it. So I chatted, it was easily 3 months until these sensations came on that I even thought of going to a doctor. It sounds strange, but it also seemed like too much. I can't go to a doctor, I'm too tired. But my CBT therapist said, it's time to go. And this was not so long after the lockdown, the pandemic. The doctors were still hard to get. So it was like a 3-month waiting period it was 1 month to get an MRI. I got my first MRI, which, by the way, was clean. It had the normal abnormalities that MRIs have.
Thank you for mentioning that.
But clean. Everyone said, don't worry about that, or that's consistent with your age, which is another form of clean that I'll just take.
Yeah.
And finally, I got my first neurologist visit, and probably the least said about that visit, the best, but I need to share why. I viewed the neurologist as, okay, now I'm going to get the answer. My primary care doctor said, yes, okay, take the information from the MRI and find the answers. That was a mistake, I think, to put so much credence in. So I have huge respect for the medical establishment. They've saved my life multiple times. They've saved the lives of people I love multiple times. My experience with this particular neurologist was utter lack of compassion. There was no human connection at all. Went straight to the injury model. As soon as she heard, I shared about the falls. There's that's laser in on that one. I shared about being seen for anxiety for the last 4 years, not interesting. So she said your constellation of symptoms are consistent with post-concussion syndrome. So that's what we're going to call it. And by the way you diagnose concussions or post-concussion syndrome, MRI comes second. MRI exists only to rule out other things. The conventional MRI is incapable of seeing neurons at that level. It can spot major damage or something else going on in the brain, but it can't. So a clean MRI is more absence of evidence. It's not evidence of absence. If that makes sense. So she was all in that, okay, and the way this was phrased, you've injured your brain.
Were you diagnosed with a concussion back when you had the fall?
No.
Okay.
And to tell the truth, I've had many concussions in my life. This did not rank up there.
So this was just
rung my chimes pretty good in motorcycle crashes and horse events and things like that.
Yeah.
This was not that.
Okay.
But
it was just significant enough for you to note that okay, right. I did have a fall.
And unfortunately, and this becomes part of my story, is part of the things I was sharing with the CBT therapist before the diagnosis was, it feels like my brain is injured. It hurts so much and everything is misfiring. It feels like my brain is injured. So I was ready to take that message in. So she said, your brain is injured. Okay, confirmation bias accepted. And then she gave me the other way to diagnose concussion is cognitive test. That's exactly what the coach, how many fingers am I holding up, that kind of thing. And she asked me to recite the months of the year backwards. And she said, care to try it again? And I missed one. I said, oh, I missed May, didn't I? She said, yeah, you missed May. So based on that, I'm going to refer you to cognitive therapy, a speech therapist. I don't know if people understand speech therapists. They're really interesting people. But specifically in the role of someone being rehabilitated for like a stroke or traumatic brain injury. And she said,
I want to just say a word here about concussion diagnosis. The audiologists and vestibular therapists, physical therapists are often involved in the diagnosis of concussion. And there's a huge battery of tests that we can do to see if it seems that someone's had a concussion. And reciting the months backwards is not it. So there's all sorts of stuff that we can do. And we're talking about acutely, like say an athlete is hit in the head. We have standardized test protocols that we use involving balance and vision and cognition and memory that can let us know, hey, someone actually had a concussion. So for someone to use those very brief, I don't even know whether to call it a task, to use a task like that many months after the fact basically gives us no confirmation that you had a concussion. It captures a snapshot of performance in time when you were already dealing with brain fog and dizziness and all this other stuff that was probably making it very difficult to think clearly anyway.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I wish I'd
I
wish I'd known the right specialist to see at the time.
Well, as you said, many specialists are looking at things through a biomedical lens and will try to find a physical explanation for someone's symptoms. So that's how they're trained, which is exactly what you want if you have an acute problem. If you have a gunshot wound, you want them to say, oh, I have found the gunshot wound. Let's fix that, right? Mm-hmm. But for something like this, maybe a little bit less useful to look at things that way.
Right. And she certainly delivered some messages that I took on board that took me a long time to get rid of. You've injured your brain. You have cognitive deficits now. Ugh. We're going to send you to rehab to see if, and her words, some people have good luck getting some of them back. It's like, okay, thank you so much. So that was the last I saw of this particular doctor. I shared this with my CBT therapist, and you can begin to appreciate how the language starts to form a funnel around this. I shared that, okay, I have PCS, post-concussion syndrome, and he shared that, I have other traumatic brain injury patients. That wording, other traumatic brain injury patients. Yes. And I can give you a referral to a specialist in traumatic brain injury, a neurologist. I said, okay, let's do that. So you can kind of see the funnel forming and the story forming. And so now 7 months, 8 months after the...
I'm just getting angry. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here and I just have to say that out loud. I have to speak my emotions right now, Ron. I'm hearing this and I'm getting really angry. This is just not right.
It has taken me a while to kind of process my own anger. Now that when I could see this backwards and understand, take neurocircuit dizziness symptoms back into that setting and say, okay, here's someone with all these symptoms I've described, and they meet all the criteria for concussion, so therefore, don't have to look any further.
I equate that to, like, when someone here, gets diagnosed with PPPD or vestibular migraine, and they'll kind of pinpoint, oh, it's because, you had COVID, or it's because you had, a virus affect your inner ear. And not to say those things don't in and of themselves biologically cause dizziness, but that's not a good enough explanation for why someone has chronic symptoms.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that in case other listeners are wondering if that applies to them as well.
Right. In fact, if I can jump ahead, there's one thought that I formed later in recovery that I would love to have shared with me back then. I think a lot of us have heard this expression, we don't know why your condition becomes chronic in some people. I heard that a lot. I'm sure a lot of us have heard this. And I just want to take the period from the end of that sentence and slide it back to, we don't know, period. And everything after that is speculation. And they've just stepped outside their domain expertise. And I wish I could have heard that and understand, okay, he's just taken off his doctor coat and he's just a person sharing anecdotal evidence. He's not speaking as a doctor anymore. So whenever in fact, I even change it to not from we don't know to I don't know, because we take on that we don't know why it's chronic, seems to speak for every doctor everywhere, every specialty, every modality. It's like, that's clearly not right. So anyway, I'll leave that for people to maybe consider doing that, sliding that period back to ending after I don't know.
That's so good. So good, Ron. Haven't heard that one from you before. That's good. Good stuff. Please, I'll stop interrupting you now.
So waiting for the second neurologist again, it takes months to get one. I was doing the speech therapy, and this was another kind of form of confirmation bias because it was mostly testing. Let's find where your cognitive defects are. And what turned up are, frankly, things that I've experienced just as part of autism. Monotropism, I talked about, what they call divided attention tasks, trying to do two things at once. It's just always been challenging, and I nosedived on those kinds of tests. So therefore, those were the kinds of tests that were done exhaustively to try to improve it, which you can imagine what it feels like to have all the things that you can ace not done, and the things that you fail on to be the center of attention and to continue to fail at it and think, oh, I really am broken. I'm not getting better. Anyway, so, and also an interesting data point is this particular speech therapist had me tracking my sensations through the day to try to understand when they became worse. And after about the second week, I stopped doing it and said, You know when they become worse? When I sit down to write what they are. And I'm not going to do this anymore. So that was my experience. I also requested to do some vestibular rehab therapy. That was my request because it's like, I'm having trouble walking and no one seems to be giving me a referral. So I'm going to ask for one. So I did vestibular rehab therapy. And that was useful just 6 weeks, not a lot, just to get a little bit feeling of I can walk heel to toe. Okay, I'm feeling a little bit. It didn't change symptoms at all. It just the confidence of being that I'm not going to fall down increased. So then, second neurologist, he was actually more practical in terms of giving referrals. And at this point, I leaned on neurologists as referral machines. Because, yeah, what can I say? And he did a really good job, and I appreciated that we were kind of checking off all the things that it might have been in a methodical way now. So electrocardiogram, blood work, sleep study, an overnight strapped into EEGs all night long. These have all come back clean. So I was appreciating discovering, oh, I don't have apneas. I have normal REM sleep. You know, this is all good to know. First visit to an ENT, clean. And I love this one doctor because at the end of it, he said, what I can diagnose as an ENT, you're clean. Whatever is going on with you is beyond my ability. It's outside of my field. Somehow your vestibular system and your brain aren't talking. I don't know why. For a doctor to say, I don't know why, is so empowering. He said, I would just continue your vestibular rehab and CBT. And good for you that you're already doing it. So
he was giving you decent advice, really, based on the conventional approach. Yeah.
Right. And I appreciate it at the time. Then an audiologist, so in your field. So discovered that I have, consistent with age, lost some of my high pitch, frequency sensitivity, but normal otherwise. We did a balance assessment. So the VNG, VEMP, caloric testing.
Oh, you did all that too?
Yeah.
Lucky you.
All clean, just CVEMP and what's the other one? I don't know, TVEMP,
OVEP?
whatever. Bilaterally absent, but not a problem. So I accepted, okay, not a problem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Vision therapy, they recommended vision therapy. I forgot to mention that one of my symptoms was that text was doubling. It wasn't fuzzy, it was doubling, side to side doubling, not up and down doubling.
Oh.
And vision therapy was recommended, and it was called convergence insufficiency. And I know I've heard you speak about that is not unusual. Other people have that and don't even know they have that.
Yes.
And other people recover from it. And that probably if I'd not done vision therapy, I probably would have just naturally recovered it. It did show me, I did vision therapy for 6 months out of pocket. That was dear. It did teach me some really useful things of that I only later, when I became part of the program, understood. Its role is I was in tunnel vision mode, which is completely locked in. Everything I interacted with, I had to look and focus on before I touched it. My peripheral vision was gone. It's just, my brain was not seeing anything but what I was focused on. So just to have simple things like that. I don't have to go down to what I learned in visual therapy, but actually one of the strongest is, oh, okay. I feel a whole lot safer when I do their peripheral vision exercises. So that's the lesson. So the last thing from this neurologist, I went a couple times. was he gave me a referral to a neuropsychologist who specialized in traumatic brain injuries. So following that pattern, and he left me with the message that, anyone in your situation who sees experience usually sees it in the first year or 2 years. So I had now a calendar, and I was halfway through the calendar. So he was a nice guy, but I heard that message in the way you might imagine. And his parting words were, continue with the CBT and vestibular rehab. So the message was pretty clear. The message that the story I was telling myself at that point is, yeah, I have injured my brain. I have cognitive deficits. What am I going to do? So that's when I started searching online and discovered the Steady Coach. Indirectly, I was researching things like vestibular disorders. I think on the Veda website, I just saw some article that referred to you, and okay, let's go check that out. And yes, so that was 2022, early 2023. So it'd been about 15 months of just symptoms, just nonstop, 24/7 symptoms. Nothing I did medically or therapeutically changed that. So then I joined, and several things happened at once, very serendipitous things happening all at once. First, I took the free course, all of the free course, and you probably don't remember this, but on one of the videos that you had on YouTube, I asked a question.
I do remember.
And
yeah.
It was kind of about the order of, do people in your community have these kind of sensations? You said, yep, yeah, they do. And so I joined in, I think, March 2023. And things turned around. And I'll describe how things turned around and in what way, and why things that were important to me in the program that helped them turn around. But there were other couple things that happened simultaneously that I think were important to my dismantling this "you are broken" story. One is, as I was doing this research, I kept coming across different diagnoses for the same collection of symptoms. It's a post-concussion syndrome. I was thinking of it as like Venn diagrams. Post-concussion syndrome has these symptoms. Vestibular migraine has these symptoms. Triple PD has these symptoms. Generalized anxiety disorder has these symptoms. And I thought, wait a minute, this does not make sense at all. You can't, these symptoms are so bizarre. You can't say that they're owned by those particular diagnoses. So I was really unhappy feeling that this core set of sensations that they're all describing, that's got to be something else. They're just lumping it into the initial diagnosis. They're overlooking something important. There may be certain symptoms related specifically to a concussion injury or vestibular disorder. Totally legit, but the bulk, it's impossible for them all to be. So that, and then of course discovered the Steady Coach and heard about neural circuit dizziness and thought, oh, there's a name for that thing. They haven't noticed it, but there's a name for it. And so to a certain extent, when I arrived into the program, and especially after taking that free course, I was already primed to challenge my diagnosis. It's like, okay, did I have a concussion? Maybe. No evidence for or against? Maybe. But I'm not going to hold that too tightly. And the other very important thing for me is I finally got to see the neuropsychologist, remember, the traumatic brain injury specialist. I was also seen, belonged to a lot of Facebook groups and things like that. And although all of them said, don't go to a neuropsychologist, you will be wiped out for weeks. It's the worst experience of your life.
It's too much for your brain. Yes.
Yes. Yeah,
Too much
exactly.
for you. Yes.
And so I said, but, I have to go. I have to find out. I have to, what are my cognitive defects? They're going to find out. So let's go. So I did go. They leave the whole day. An exam takes the whole day. I was able to finish it in a little over 4 hours, just 4 continuous hours of testing. And the really interesting thing about this is I had full symptoms. Dizziness at 10, brain fog at 10, derealization at 10, all of this stuff. I can smile about it, but of course I'm not really smiling. But I thought, this is actually a great test. I'm going to get a really fair appraisal because I'm all of this stuff. So I took the test, and just the same week I joined the Steady Coach, I got the results back at the test. And the test showed that I was slightly below normal in divided attention tasks, which is a surprise. But I was in the 98th percentile of like the majority of the others. So explained to me is that of 100 people like me, my age, my background, only 1 or 2 of them would have scored more highly than I did on these tests. So this, and I love the way this, she summarized the assessment was, patient does not meet the criteria for a neurocognitive disorder. You could really have served me cake and ice cream.
Wow.
So I took those words as, okay, you're cleared. You're cleared of any question of cognitive deficits. So I've now challenged that the concussion and post-concussion diagnosis was accurate. The story that I'd bought that I had cognitive impairments that I would possibly never improve from, those both got dismantled. At the same time, I joined the Steady Coach program. So I was primed to hear the message. I was in the fortunate position. I know a lot of people struggle with, maybe I have something that my doctor hasn't found yet. Maybe it's more the neural circuit. I was very fortunate that wasn't part of my experience, because I'd already been through that kind of angst and uncertainty, and I kind of made my decision. Okay, I'm all in. Let's let go of that diagnosis. Let's see what we've got. And so that really was the beginning of my healing, and it shows in the CBT notes. I'm talking, hey, I found this program in March of 2023. Another month later, hey, I'm starting to see, periods of times when I don't have symptoms. Hey, I would like to have seen more, but that's about the same time that the CBT therapist and I decided that it's been 4 years. I know CBT cold, and I'm having really good luck with this new approach. So let's just say a cordial farewell and go with that. So, and that's what I did. So for the next year and a half, then just 100% Steady Coach stuff. So I can talk about things that I found most useful in the program. Let's see, and reminding myself what I did. So what I found,
before you do that, some people probably heard what you just said and said, oh my gosh, it took him a year and a half. I can't live like this. So
good.
Can you just give people a sense, was that a really bad year and a half where you felt 100% miserable all the time with 24/7 symptoms?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, good point. No. Yeah, and that's a valid concern, and I would have my heart would have gone up if I heard that same thing. No, I was already. I don't want to give timelines because people will think there's timeline, but relatively quickly after joining, I was reporting to my therapist, "Hey, symptoms are down. Before I left, the feeling was very much like, wow, I could live like this, right? I'm before it was like bleak, but so if I look at my entire recovery story within the Steady Coach, only the first maybe quarter of it was high symptom. The rest, by halfway, they were basically gone. But I had a lot more things I wanted to accomplish in terms of feelings and exploration. So the latter half of this year and a half was all about inner work and exploration, the symptom part. So I guess if that puts people's mind a little bit at ease, it's not a year and a half of suffering and then suddenly the switch is flipped on. It's more like, okay, I've reached a point that I can deal with this, and then I've reached a point when it's gone. Earlier than that.
Thank you.
Okay, so things that I did that were useful to me were simple things. The most important message I heard out of the gate was be a B- student, because I came in, A+ ready. I'm going to read every forum post. I'm going to watch every video. And I heard that, and I took that seriously, and I did.
So you were the best at being a B- student.
Yeah, an A+ B- student.
What an A+ student thing to say. My gosh.
Yeah. So simple things like parasympathetic breathing. I know some of these things. Everyone finds what works for them the best. This one worked for me. Parasympathetic breathing. It I understood it because I remembered it as soon as I did it. I remembered being 6 years old and doing that, involuntarily in an uncomfortable situation. So as soon as I was introduced to it, I said, oh, I know this. I've done this before. Somatic tracking. And I admit to calling me a B- student in somatic tracking is generous. C- or D+ is because I didn't fully understand it. I did it, and we'll get into it a little bit more because it became one of my most important tools later. But in the beginning, and just with those, I was starting to see glimpses. What I call glimpses, meaning periods of time when, I'm feeling all right now. I'm not feeling these symptoms. And about that time, I don't know if I read about this or this was my own idea, probably read about this. I refer to it as my little yellow light going on. I think of it as when I'm symptomatic, that's like red light. When I'm feeling good, it's green light. When I'm feeling something is not right, but pre-symptomatic, something is not right. I consider that a yellow light. And I was slowly developing that sense of that. I'd be reading an article and it's like my little yellow light would go on. So I didn't understand at the time. I wasn't very in touch with interoception, but that's what was happening. Something in my body was saying, this isn't right. You're no symptoms, but this isn't right. So I started to rely on that. And at first, my response to it was avoidance. I learned more productive ways, but I took it as what you're doing right now, you should stop doing. And that was actually a useful bridge to other things. At the time, just because I became more attuned to some part of me is telling me what I'm doing right now doesn't feel good. So right. Do something about it.
Thank you for mentioning this because I get questions about this a lot. People aren't sure how to titrate that. How much do I be nice to myself and how much do I push through because I'm not supposed to avoid things. Like, when does self-compassion become avoidance, essentially?
Right. Right.
And what you're saying is there's kind of a calibration process that changes depending on where you are in your recovery, where at the beginning, self-compassion might mean not pushing yourself to an extreme at first, so that you can start to get in tune with the yellow zone. I'm thinking of it more of as a zone than a single point in time. It's really, there's a little bit of a buffer zone between green and red, where if you can start to recognize when you're there without responding obsessively, like, oh, no, I'm in the yellow zone now, I have to stop, but just starting to develop the ability to recognize when that's happening is a really important skill for really life in general. But then it also helps prepare you for on in the process when you are going to start pushing farther and avoiding less. And you might be able to gauge, okay, this feels like it might be really, really tough, but actually I'm okay here. Even though this task or these symptoms feel really high, I'm actually all right. I'm containing this. I'm handling this.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. It took me, at that point, I wasn't ready there yet,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
that was the evolution of the yellow light, as it became more self-attunement, and then more the introspection of, okay, yeah, I don't feel comfortable, but avoiding it is not, in this particular case, is not the right thing. Maybe looking more closely at it is. But anyway, that parasympathetic breathing and the little yellow light actually had a lot of mileage for me in the somatic tracking. I did a little journaling. It was too early for me in my process because I wasn't resourced. I brought up a lot of stuff. It's a very powerful tool. It's like a microscope, and I found it useful. And I also found, wow, I'm not ready to hear what some of this is coming up yet. So I will put it on the shelf for now. I'll come back to it when I can handle that kind of stuff. It seemed like the right decision at the time, but because I was listening to myself, I still value it. But at the time, I wasn't quite ready. I did a little bit of internal family systems, and I found that really interesting, IFS. And the way I handled that is I found it most useful to make pictures of all the parts. So I did kind of an extended parts inventory as I saw it at the time. I had something like...
Do you want to explain to people just a little bit more background on, I'm sure I can explain if you'd prefer not to, but it might be useful to hear your take on it.
Oh, okay. And I'm not speaking as an IFS expert. I know you're, I think, level 3. So
yeah, but I don't know that any person who calls him or herself an IFS expert is coming from a good place to help people. So that may be a kind of a strong stance, but I guess what I have found, at least, is that coming from the standpoint of a curious collaborator with someone, maybe a guide, not an expert, has been the most productive for me working with clients. But of course, yeah. So anyway,
my understanding,
you are highly qualified to answer the question.
Yes, you are. So I read the books that were recommended, the self-healing book, No Bad Parts book.
Self-Therapy by Jay Early.
Yes, Self-Therapy. Yeah, thank you. And kind of took on the message as I understood it of how we have many parts, some protective parts that are shielding, things that the part believes there's a good reason to shield that thing. Exile parts that have been damaged that maybe a protector is shielding us from, and how the protected parts can have managers that control how I behave to avoid crossing certain boundaries that I've found are uncomfortable, and firefighter parts that react really in the moment to try to save us from their perceived danger. And for me, it was most useful to give them pictures, because it just gave me something to identify them with, so that it didn't just become a jumble of stuff. And
So
I'll talk a little bit more about how IFS factored in later.
Okay. So just to clarify further for people who are just totally new to the idea, Ron, you're saying that it's like, oh, there's a part of me that really wants to people please and really wants to make sure everything goes smoothly for everyone around me. Because if I don't, another part of me that is afraid of being abandoned will become very fearful and overwhelm me. And I want to avoid that consequence. That's just very, very simply. So it's just a way of conceptualizing, the way I think of it now, different emotional learnings or circuits in the parts of our brains that make decisions behind the scenes about how we need to run our lives. Putting some concrete language around them helps people access some of these things without getting super analytical and just, getting stuck in kind of cognition rather than experiencing something. And for people who found that explanation confusing, and it kind of was, there's a wonderful interview that I did with Dr. Tori Olds. That one explains what I just said in great detail and in much simpler language. IFS is only one way, or internal family systems is only one way of changing those little neural circuits that are affecting your stress and how you behave in response to stress. So I'd highly recommend checking out that interview. And I know, Ron, you loved that interview as well. So I'll put that in the notes or in the just the video description if you're on YouTube.
Yes. Great video. That video with Tori Olds explained retroactively so much of my recovery experience. So
it's one of my favorite conversations. Yeah. It was awesome. Yeah.
And
please continue. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
The next step along this journey is I was kind of reluctant to explore feelings. This is probably classic avoidance. Probably parts telling me not to do this. But you may remember this as well. At live Q&A that we did, I asked the question, is it possible that I have Alexithymia, which is a condition. I came at it from the standpoint of autistic people sometimes are said to have that. You reasonably pointed out that it's not just, Alexithymia is the inability to name and understand what it is a person's feeling. So it doesn't mean they don't feel it. Strong feeling, just can't name it and can't. And you said, that's actually not uncommon for people to report, but it actually is more likely that they just don't have the skill yet. A lot of people have just never been exposed to doing that. So you gave me some advice at the time you mentioned a really great book, by the way. It took me a year to read this book, Lisa Feldman Barrett's How Emotions Are Made. Yeah, that's, for people listening, that's not a requirement to heal, but it's fascinating.
It's a great book, but it is a bit dense. So you can save it for when you're feeling a little bit better.
Right.
I know there's another book you're going to recommend that they should read right now.
Right. The other book, and you mentioned to me Living Like You Mean It by Ronald Frederick. That was a pivotally important book. Just then, it is so practical. It's not woo-woo. It's just, okay, do this and this and this, and yep, you'll feel it, you'll understand. And it's right. And the book is quite right. So that was a very valuable reference you gave me. And you also mentioned another thing that, and this By the way, that book and your next recommendation became really interesting tools in developing. You mentioned emotion wheels. Said I would probably find it interesting to get some emotion wheels. There were some on the site.
And they're free.
Start,
If you Google emotion wheel, you will find them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And start to explore, as you described it, the level of arousal of like, do it feel like kind of minor, or do you feel so driven that you have to do something? What's the level of arousal of the feeling, and the valence, unpleasant, pleasant? Start to categorize the feelings as a way to start to explore it. And
I said that? I gave you that advice?
Yeah.
That's good advice, man.
And you know what else you said? You said, Ron, try this. Get back to us and tell us how it worked. And I am now getting back to you to tell you how it worked.
Thank you.
A little late, but all of that was really, really important in the subsequent part of my recovery. For these reasons, I got the emotion. I read Living Like You Mean It. I started to do those things. I got the emotion wheels, started to do the work. And between the two of them, I started to make this realization that when I described at the time in that conversation of that, I sometimes had this feel, I understood when I was angry or when I was sad, that was clear to me. But there were other times when I just felt like, I don't like this feeling, but I don't know what it is. So when I was having those feelings, I was using kind of what I'd learned in Living Like You Mean It, the emotion wheels, and I discovered an interesting thing that was a clue, which was I'd look at an emotion wheel and say, well, I'm feeling some of this, and I'm feeling some of that, and I'm feeling some of this. I'm feeling, and then I just suddenly flashed back to, I don't know if everyone else had this experience, when you're 5 years old and you get your first box of Crayola crayons and you start coloring and start mixing colors, and it's fabulous until you suddenly, every color you mix turns brown. It's like, I don't know what magic there is, but every combination of colors turns brown. And it's suddenly it's like, oh, I get it. That feeling of I'm not comfortable with this, that's multiple emotions. That's multiple feelings happening at once. And I'm just not skilled at telling what they are. The same way that our options in our eyes can see the primary colors behind the brown, but our visual center says it's brown. And I started to work, okay, I get it. There are multiple emotions. Let's see if we can refine this process a little bit more. Use the Living Like You Mean It and understand a little bit better. Okay, I'm feeling both. Take something like regret. That was one I was working on. It's like, oh, there's a part of me that's really feeling deep grief right now. And there's a part that's feeling shame. And there's another part that's angry. It's like, okay, I get it. And you just heard me use words there apart. That became the other aha. Suddenly, when I was asking, why would three emotions show up or more at once? And then suddenly the IFS background suddenly made a whole lot of sense. It's like, oh, different parts of me are showing up. Sometimes in response to each other, sometimes in response to the event. That's what I'm feeling. So that uncertainty that I had, that alexithymia was just, I didn't have the skill to recognize mixed emotions. So this became a really, really important skill. And it became an important skill, not just in appreciating the using a parts model. It's just a way to relate to how we feel, but also interoception. It's like, in some sense, that book and this experience kind of opened up listening to what signals my body was giving. It's like that little yellow light suddenly grew up. And it's like, oh, I get it. My body is talking to me, and I haven't been listening for a long time. And now I can. And so I'm very grateful for that advice, by the way. That so I feel like that was kind of a pivotal point in recovery is that learning to
that skill.
listen.
So I'd like to make a comment and then ask a question, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
So I want people to notice that what you're describing isn't, okay, I made a list of all the bad things that are happening to me, and now I'm going to release the trauma. When people say that stuff, I get triggered now on social media when I see, and I know where people are going with this. I'm not saying that it's bad to not be traumatized anymore, but releasing, like, people get the impression sometimes they're so desperate to get better. Obviously, it would make sense to interpret what I'm saying in this way. Okay, so what she's saying is my emotions are trapped within me, and I need to purge them. I need to get them out. And I need to resolve. Oh, so this is from trauma. Okay, so what I need to do is go back and purge the trauma from my system and get rid of it. What you're describing, so first of all, for many people, what you're describing is enough. They don't even need to revisit old experiences necessarily. It's that they're lacking skills now. And when they build skills now, the stress goes way down because things that are happening on the outside are just less stressful to the system. So that's one thing I wanted to say. But then when people have the skills that you have now, and they do say, you know what, now I'm starting to see I have these patterns of responding in a particular way. This seems like it's been going on for a while. I feel like if I'm going to stop doing this, I really need to go backwards in some way to understand it more, to experience it on a deeper level or an older level. For example, I have this pattern. I used people pleasing before. Let's just say I have this pattern of being very harsh on myself, very demanding. I think when people get to the point where they start to feel emotions and have skills around emotions, they may notice just how loud that is and how often it's happening, and then find it's really difficult to stop doing it despite the difficulties it's causing. And at that point, going backwards and revisiting some of the circumstances that might have led to the development of that might actually be useful because you can actually affect change. So now with those lengthy comments, that was not just one comment. I'm sorry, I totally went on way more than one comment there, Ron. But you probably expected that. My question was, so as you, and I'm sure you may be getting to this, but you're building this skill. I did not hear you mention anywhere that you were using like a list of adverse events to do this. So what were you using to evoke and play around with some of these feelings? Were they just like, I went into the shower and I got scared because my symptoms were high? Was it related to symptoms? Was it related to interactions with other people? Was it, in fact, revisiting old experiences? Like, where were you coming up with these things to practice with?
Initially, yeah, that's a great question. Initially, my return to focusing on somatic tracking was one. When I would do it, I would do somatic tracking not just for sensations, but for feelings. So like, take regret. I'm just making that up, but take regret. It's like, I'm feeling regret now. Let's just be with that and explore that a little bit. So I wasn't looking, as you say, I wasn't looking for past traumas. It's just, what am I feeling right now? That's interesting. Validate it. There'll be plenty of time to, put stories around it if I want to, but just validating that I'm feeling it. And I mentioned somatic tracking again, because that became kind of the next stepping stone. Now that I had a better sense of interoception and a few more tools to look at feelings, I could return to this thing that I didn't understand quite well the first time around. I think it was an interview with Vanessa, I think, that she said she asked clients a question, why are you doing somatic tracking? And I realized, oh, that's an embarrassing question. I don't know. I'm doing it because people I trust said it would help me. And so I actually now said, okay, have a better sense of what's going on interoception wise with my feelings. Now, when I do somatic tracking, let's watch how it's affecting me. Like,
Yes.
what actually happens when I'm doing somatic tracking to me? I already embraced the notion of outcome independence. I wasn't doing it to fix sensations. I changed the wording slightly because I changed the word to outcome resilience. I wanted it to be less rigid, right? And that I really was interested in the outcome. It's just that I didn't necessarily expect what it would be, if that makes sense. I didn't go in assuming if I do it right, this will be the outcome. It's more like, let's do it and see what the effect is. And I started to understand, oh, I'm really starting to appreciate this ability to go to a larger self, an observer, to watch these sensations or these feelings. I can watch fear, and not have to chase it away. I can watch sensations, not feel I have to chase it away. And it's actually kind of a good feeling that I've got this space. So I felt like I was slowly building up an answer to Vanessa. That's why I do somatic tracking. Mm-hmm. And this leads to two breakthrough experiences that I had that I'd like to share, if I may, that I view as kind of the logical outcome of this new somatic tracking and relating to things. And for people viewing, I'd like to just share, I'm going to share some sensations. But and obviously take care of yourselves if they're triggering, fast forward. But consider a couple things. One, the outcome is good. There is no suffering, and it's just a breakthrough. Things changed after this. So if I can share a couple of these. Please. They happened pretty close together in time. So the first one, just one evening, I could feel my interoception was churned up a little bit. I didn't understand why. I still didn't quite have the skills yet. And I was going to the bathroom to brush my teeth for bed. And as soon as I looked up the mirror, I started to fall over. Visual vertigo. I'd never experienced visual vertigo. And I caught myself on two walls. I was leaned far over. The world was spinning. And my initial reaction, not a forced reaction, not a cognitive reaction, my first reaction is, this is interesting. This is really fascinating. And I was looking at it and saying, wait, why is it, the world is clearly not spinning. Why is my brain telling me it's spinning? And that Kleenex box, it never actually gets upside down. So I was laser focusing in on, what is it? Why does it seem like it's spinning, but it doesn't turn around? So I was really caught up in the experience of, this is fascinating. And I need to back up and tell you a brief story before I finish this. I mentioned I was a horseback rider. One thing you learn about horses is that when you sit on a horse that you trust and that trusts you, it's like your two vagus nerves fuse. Like everything you think, the horse knows. Every fear, every good thought, the horse knows. It's similar to everything the horse knows. Everything the horse feels, you feel. And I learned when the horse was threatened or spooked, that I could do some deep breathing and deep relaxation and relax the horse. So now come back to this moment in the bathroom. And I asked myself almost facetiously, body, what are you trying to tell me with this bizarre experience? It's not scary, but what's going on? And I got a flash of my horse Ty standing there, legs locked. And I said, oh, your body is spooked. It's as simple as that. It was a much simpler answer than I expected. So I literally just visualized sitting in the saddle, getting my stirrups square, and doing my deep breathing through all the way top of my head, through my body, my hips, through the horse to the ground. I did 3 of those until the horse, this horse, was no longer spooked. And I said, okay, good. By the way, it sounds strange, but there was no fear. The horse was spooked, but there was no fear. It was a very odd experience. And then when I opened my eyes, the visual vertigo was gone. And it's like it hadn't been there. So I realized, something just happened here. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but something just happened. And so I just went off to bed and thought about it a little bit. And then a few days later, I had a similar experience, completely different sensation. I was at the pharmacy, which was in a grocery store. Grocery stores were still a little source of uncertainty and uncomfort with me. And while I was standing in line, someone dropped a pallet behind me. Those big wooden pallets went bang, and I jumped. And it's what I do. And then again, the most fascinating thing happened, and I was just enthralled by watching it happen. And it sounds crazy, but that's the way it played out. Is first, all the conversations got muted in the room. I could physically follow the dropping of noise of the conversation of other people around me. And then my tinnitus went just through the roof. I could feel like someone had 2 knobs. One was turning down and one was turning up. Then the lights that were really too bright weren't too bright anymore. And all the colors washed out. Like all the reds turned brown. It's like, this is fascinating. This brain. I really felt like I was like backstage watching a production and said, keep going. I want to see where this goes. And then it's like a veil. Literally, the feeling was like a veil of derealization came down. So now I'm dizzy in the wraith world of Lord of the Rings. I can't hear almost anything, and colors are washed out. And I'm in a public place, standing in line. Like, if my worst fear could have been written down, this would have been it. But there was no fear. It was just, this is just so incredibly interesting. So I just rode with it. I paid for my stuff, headed out the store, and I did kind of the same parasympathetic breathing. Just, okay, that would be useful. I don't know why. It was probably that palette spooked me somehow. Just do the breathing. Mm-hmm. And by the time I walked out the store, all those sensations were gone. And I felt them on peel, like the same thing. It's like colors came back. The world seemed realer again. And I could hear conversations again. So by the time I was out the door, it's like, okay, I watched my brain go into derealization and I watched my brain come out. And it was just the most fascinating thing. And I understood now, in combination with that other experience, that, okay, something has fundamentally changed, that I'm not forcing my reaction to this anymore, or saying, this is how I should feel, or it's just that was the new reaction.
Yep.
And
Yep.
What I found after that, it took me some months to kind of put the pieces together, what might have happened. The Tori Old's video comes to mind. But the experience after that was that prior to this, when someone would ask me about my sensations, I would give them kind of a up and down like this. Now they'd say what my sensations are. It's more like blip, blip, blip. They were less frequent. They were much less intense. They were very short-lived, and I almost always knew the trigger. Like, it could be someone could say something that kind of roused some part in me about, oh, I've just been found out I've made a mistake, or something like that. And I feel a sudden poof sensation, last for maybe a minute, and then gone again. So whatever happened in those 2 episodes were kind of maybe a transition of the way I was now relating to sensations. But from that point on, so that was, again, that's like maybe the first third of my way through recovery. It really changed what I felt from that point out. And it's been true from then till now. So nothing changed. So I did not expect those. I was not planning those. They just kind of happened. And then I'd like to describe where my journey went next. Do you have any thoughts on what went on there?
So the way I was thinking about it, just if I were to put it in the language that I often use to describe this stuff, it's the difference between demonstrating safety and trying to talk yourself into having safety. So, by the way, trying to talk yourself into safety actually does work for some people. So if you're in a grocery store and you have terrible sensations and you say, okay, hand on my heart, I'm reminding myself this is a brain error. This is just my brain making a mistake. I'm safe. For some people that truly does have an effect. But for those of you for whom it doesn't, it's because your body doesn't believe you. You're not able to demonstrate safety yet. You don't actually feel safe. You're saying it, but you don't really feel it. And coming back to some of the skills you were acquiring, Ron, I mean, again, this is just my framing on this, not saying you have to agree or anyone has to agree, but you were working on creating this safe relating with yourself already by starting to listen to your emotions in this more like curious, interested way, in starting to treat yourself differently, if I were to sum it up. So you had invested enough time and energy in this relationship so that when it came time for the relationship to be tested, your body could sort of look to you and be like, okay, he's not fazed by this. It's actually, it's okay. And you didn't have to respond trying to convince yourself that you were safe. You already knew that you were.
Yes.
Maybe that's one way to think about it. Yeah.
That's the way I think about it too. It had, as we hear in the Tori Olds interview, it really became, it's like that circuitry just got switched.
Yes. 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 Yeah. Yes. Please. So tell us where your journey went next, please.
Okay. So the next part of the journey is, I consider, at this point, you can tell I'm now at the point of, I'm not chasing fixed sensations. I really want to understand more about myself, my relationship to myself. And almost serendipitously, I was looking for I probably need some kind of therapy, but which one? And I was having difficulty articulating, well, what would I need to, what would I ask them to help me do? I wasn't sure.
I was just talking to someone earlier who was running into this. Like, Yonit, I don't have a mental health problem. And all these therapists are like puzzled when I'm going to them because they're like, you're mentally healthy and sound. Why do you think you need therapy? So this is the exact conversation she and I had. Like, how do we explain this to someone? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what helped get me off the fence is you did another interview. I love these interviews with a guy named Dave Jolly. It was about transformation. And that really landed with me. It's like, okay. Mm-hmm. I want to hear what he has to say. And I signed up for coaching with him,
One-on-one.
integrative psychonautics. It was the information is on the interview
And I'll link
description.
to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was important. And what after the initial interview, I know you've often talked about if it's not hit it out of the ballpark reaction, that therapist is not for you. Okay, he did. So we decided the best thing was secure self-relating. So I can't go into it. There's a lot to say about that, but it really is how I relate to myself, how I relate to others, from a secure point of view. And I can just roughly say how I do secure self-relating after being coached in this, which is, again, it's self-attunement. Like, and by the way, there were some important prerequisites to being able to secure self-relate, is being aware of your own interoception. That's very important. Being aware of feelings as they arise. So all of the things that I had learned became really important prerequisites to being able to do this. And so the things I came away with is just being present with a larger self. The whole self, like looking at it from somatic tracking of having a slightly more resourced whole self, looking at what a part is feeling or what a feeling is doing that almost constantly, of just, okay, I'm feeling this, recognizing it, validating it, no judgment, no dismissal, just present. Oh, you're feeling sad. What does that feel like? Are you feeling anything else? It becomes so just, it sounds unusual until you've tried it, but hearing your own self speak authentically without reserve, and your own self validate it and not dismiss it, not judge it,
Not avoid
is
it.
so powerful.
Yeah.
And so I did that coaching, and I put that in play, and I've been doing that constantly. And I have 2 more episodes to talk about that use secure self-relating, if I may. And then
I would love to hear them. Can I take a second to just explain for the layperson what you mean? Again, I think you explained it very well. I just want to sum it up for people. Is that okay? So most of you, when confronted with something uncomfortable, will try to deal with the uncomfortable thing, whether that's a feeling or a sensation, by avoiding it in some way, or getting overwhelmed by it, like being lost in it. So, for example, if you're having a really tough sensation day and you're feeling a lot of despair and hopelessness, you might try to distract yourself by turning on a movie that you like. And by the way, none of these things that I'm saying are bad. So it's not bad to avoid things sometimes. And it's not bad sometimes to kind of wallow in things either. It's just that you should have choices. So what Ron is describing is the middle way, the middle choice. So say, coming back to this day with symptoms, you may try to avoid it by distracting yourself, or trying to feel something else, or going for a walk, or doing something to get your mind off of it. Or you might fall into it, like start to panic. You might start to have catastrophic thoughts about it, although I think of those more as avoidances, because when you're thinking about 5 days from now, you're not experiencing what's happening right now. You're thinking about 5 days from now. But all of those ways of relating to your experience are not sending a message of safety. They're not telling your nervous system, hey, we're actually safe, they're further telling your nervous system, hey, oh my gosh, you're totally right. This is a really dangerous situation. This is a very dangerous and unpleasant feeling. So again, not to say that you shouldn't do those things sometimes. It makes sense if you have 24/7 symptoms, for example, to need to not spend all day long relating to them. It's like, I mean, I don't know about you guys. I'm a parent. And when my 7-year-old is like tantruming, I may need to take a break from that. Okay. So like you are allowed to take breaks and distract yourself and do nice things and then come back when you feel more resourced. So I just want to put that out there. It's not a bad thing. However, what Ron is describing is neither of those two extremes. We're not believing the experience and saying, oh my gosh, I am despair. That is the only thing I am. I am a black hole of despair. And this is all true. And we're also not, I'm not despairing. Everything's great. And I'm going to be positive and think really happy thoughts. We're not doing that either. We're the despair squarely in the face, and we're saying, I am noticing that a part of me feels despair. And by saying it that way, you're relating to it. The despair is not all of you. It is happening in you. It is your responsibility, but it's not all that you are. There's a bigger self, as you said, like the you that is noticing the despair. By saying it that way, you're kind of putting it in that perspective. And you're looking at it, you're acknowledging it, you're validating it, you're relating to it, you're creating a relationship with it. And when you have a relationship with something versus avoiding or falling into something, when you really don't have a choice about how you respond to it, when you have a relationship with something, there are lots of different ways you can work with that relationship. So do you think I just described kind of the idea of secure self-relating?
Yeah.
Okay.
And learning the secure self-relating also, there were other aspects of it relating to others. The same, being able to, I see that person is speaking authentically. I'm going to validate what they just said. I'm going to, I hear them. I'll let them know I hear them. It just factors into so many different places. And it's kind of an interesting thing I had not expected. It changes the way I relate to my past. I wondered at some point, am I going to have to revisit every little thing that happened to me to get better? It's like, no. I can see that. I can appreciate what that little kid was feeling. I can validate it. It doesn't need to be fixed. So, and the same for the future, which is really interesting. It's like, I have confidence that I'll be there for myself when that next hard thing happens. I don't know what it is yet, but so it really did. It's not just, inner looking at myself, but it's others, my past, my future. It's just relating to the entire world differently.
Yep. And I want to just frame this for people if they're hearing this and they're like, I am so dizzy, I can't even follow what you're saying. We noticed that Ron got better, like a lot, like almost entirely better before he embarked on this particular skill set. This is what really sealed the deal for him and gave him the resilience. And so that's what I wish for all of you. And that's why I talk about this stuff on my channel as much as I do, because my wish for you is if you're going to go through something that's as crappy as chronic dizziness symptoms, you deserve some post-traumatic growth. I mean, you deserve to have it make you better. If you're going to have to do all this work, you may as well do it with the purpose also, not just of getting better from dizziness, but of just like being a like stronger and more resilient person. So that being said, you don't have to. You don't. So I'm just letting you guys know, if you're listening to this and you're like, this just feels like a hill too big to climb right now, you don't have to do this now. You can start the way that Ron did. You started with small things, one at a time.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. This was not something that I put on ahead of me I did not expect this. And it did come only after I felt like, okay, I'm relating to the symptoms differently now. I've brought them down. to a level that's livable. And then just out of my own curiosity, what else is there? Well,
Yes.
I'm here. So
now the
let
stories.
me echo
Yes.
that. It is not necessary, but it is, if you reach a point after your sensations are less, it's an interesting place to go.
Yeah. Okay. So now the stories that
Okay. Two more stories. And no sensations here. They're just completely unexpected experiences again. And I both attribute them to secure self-relating because they both happened afterwards. One is, I call it my inner critic day, which is I was just doing secure self-relating to something else. It was something minor, but I was in that frame of mind of, I hear, as I was taking out the trash, I hear how you feel about that. What else is happening? What's going on in your body? And I emptied the trash into the wrong container, like the trash into the compost or something like that. And I have to back up a little bit and say that since third grade, I've had a really harsh inner critic. I think a lot of us do, that calls me bad names and jumps on every little mistake I make. So as soon as that trash went in, I knew the inner critic is going to have something to say about that for sure. But I was already in my larger self, already relating to myself for something else when it showed up. And the experience was really interesting, and it almost happened in slow motion because I was kind of focused in on, my first reaction was one of the target. I remember like literally putting my hands up to protect me from an attack from the left. Don't know why. Some part of me was expecting the attack. So it was like, oh, this is really interesting. The first thing that happens is the target. The target almost invites the attack. And then the second thing, what I'd call the inner critic. This is all this inner experience. It's not. The inner critic showed up, and I've used the expression like a cartoon character that comes to a screeching halt, or like if this were a bar scene, the piano player would stop playing the piano. And it's like, I really expected to find this defenseless target that I could really unload on, but yet I'm in the presence of a larger self that is accepting it. It's like, okay, bring it on. I hear that you have something to say. And it had nothing. It had one thing to say, which is, oh, this is just a mistake. Could happen to anybody. And
Wow.
and that was the last I've heard of my inner critic since. It was about 6 months ago.
Oh my gosh.
It just flipped off. I've made lots of mistakes since then, but and for a while I wondered, where did it go? Parts like don't go away like that. It was protecting me from something. Where did it go? And I think I have an answer of where it's gone, because I've been kind of listening when I make a mistake. And what it said when it left the first time is almost like a new role that part has taken. It's telling me it was just a mistake. People make mistakes. The inner critic was punishing me for mistakes to keep me from making mistakes. Like, I must not make mistakes. It's forbidden. Now the voice is, people make mistakes. It's okay. Don't worry about it. So it kind of transitioned from a harsh part to kind of part of that larger part of me saying, okay, you made a mistake, big deal.
Effortless.
Yes, and it wasn't until I saw the Tori Olds interview that we've talked about and memory reconsolidation that I kind of understood, okay, that's what happened that day. That circuit, that inner critic circuit was fully active, and it met a real strong mismatch.
Oh, sure it did.
For disconfirmation.
Yeah.
And so I was grateful for that. Again, unexpected, not planned. I wasn't doing part work on Inner-critic. It just happened. And
And for
last
framing for people, imagine if Ron is dealing with this inner critic for all these years, cumulatively, how much stress that is. So the point is, no matter which way you go about it, if you have a strong inner critic and you suspect, wow, I think that's probably really contributing to my stress bucket here, that's why we talk about working with it. But the way that Ron ended up working with this was sort of vicariously, kind of accidentally, but because he spent all this other time building up these skills so that when it showed up, he was ready to change it permanently, really. And again, not saying it's the only way, but it is certainly the most effortless way once you get to it, because then there's no maintenance. There's no like, wait, what am I supposed to do again when I call myself a jerk? Right. I'm supposed to call myself really nice. Okay, how do I do that? Right. What self-compassion phrases do I have to think of? Like, there's all this effort involved in that. And what you're describing is an effortless change. It's just a change. You've completely changed.
Right. It doesn't need any attention anymore. It just, okay.
Yeah. Thank you for illustrating all this. This is just wonderful. These are just very good, concrete examples for people to hear about things that they will notice changing during this process. So thank you.
Yeah,
I know you have another one too. But
it's a good thing you pointed out, however, is that all of these breakthrough experiences were not expected. They built on other skills that had been developed. So we talk about doing the work. It's quite often that the evidence of this, how that work has changed us, is when something unexpected happens. So for me, all of the breakthroughs were truly unexpected, not planned. And the way I see that is, I know recovery is not linear. We talk about that a lot, up and down, up and down. And I see that as that the sensations are not a good metric for measuring recovery. I think of it as it's actually a little bit more linear than we think, but all this noise of the sensations going up and down make us think we're going backwards.
Preach.
I don't think we ever go backwards. We're just not aware of it because of the noise. And sometimes it takes one of these unexpected events to say, oh, I understand. I have changed in ways. And my last episode is just where one of the few really intentional ones of secure self-relating applied to a very challenging situation. And I know for time I won't go deep into exactly it, but we had a house emergency. Things went very wrong suddenly over a couple hours, and we had people out to fix it, and everything they tried failed, and they would have to now go to the next level and the next level and the next level. And the price tag they were literally like adding zeros to the price tag every new discovery. And I heard myself say at one point, I can't believe this is happening. And that's about the moment that kind of a larger self said, I hear you say you can't believe this is happening. Yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it? Is there something that would make you feel better? And I decided, yeah, let's just approach this in a secure, self-relating way, wherever it goes. And so I made the conscious decision, okay. By the way, I was at the point, very close to the point of meltdown. I'm truly on autistic meltdown when this happened. I said, okay, let's just go moment by moment, get curious. What are they finding? What is it going to cost? How do I deal with it? And it took 7 days to fix this thing, and lots and lots of money and lots of noise. And I found I was able to kind of stay in that state, not constantly, that would be just exhausting, but every time something came up, my way of relating to what came up was this way. And I just have to share one moment that is like, really captures it. There were roofers on our roof because there had been a prior bad thing happen, and this was their day to fix it. So there are nail guns and boots on the roof, clomp, clomp, clomp. There's a guy writing a very large invoice at my kitchen table.
Oh.
There's a jackhammer outside breaking through my concrete driveway. The second jackhammer, because the first one broke after the concrete saw broke.
That's confidence inspiring. Yes.
I'm sitting at my monitor trying to figure out how can I arrange money to arrive at an account in time. And some friend called me to ask some advice. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had to laugh at that point. It's like, this is amazing. This is a real test. And it was fine. It was fine. And my emotions were up and down, and that was fine. I could just, okay, I'm really scared right now. I'm feeling really stirred up, but no sensations, no meltdown. So this experience was kind of my, okay, you're good. You're good to go. So secure self-relating was an important part.
There's a particular person who I'm hoping is watching this, who had a similar house emergency and I was validating, like, of course that's terrifying and stressful beyond belief, but it doesn't have to affect you the way it's affecting you right now. And for anyone listening who is not having a house emergency or is having some other kind of source of stress, we are not belittling the magnitude of the stress. This sounds, Ron, as you're telling the story, I'm smiling and laughing because there's really, otherwise I'm going to cry over this. That sounds terrible. And I've been through some similar things recently with all sorts of mishaps that all just happened at once, and just a whole bunch of very expensive house related things. But it's not about attitude. People will talk about attitude. It's not necessarily about attitude. It's about whether you have the ability to lead in a way what's happening inside your system and just contain it. And when I say contain it, I don't mean forcibly contain it. I mean, can you see those experiences for what they are? Momentary experiences that are tough and deserve your love and attention, but you're so much bigger than that. And you are so much more resilient than these feelings might lead you to believe if you're swept up in them.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, in that case, Ron, I officially graduate you. You can leave now.
Thank you.
You have learned everything that I know, so you may go.
This has been quite a journey. And may I share one last thing that is, because I know we're tight on time. The question that I always wanted to hear in a success story that I'd like to answer concretely. The one question I wanted to hear is, are the sensations gone?
Yes, I was going to ask that. Yes. I got.
How gone? Are you managing them, or did you hypnotize yourself not to feel them? Where are they?
Yeah. What does it feel like?
So I want to be crystal clear so people get it. So my experience is most of every day they're at a true zero, and I'm going to emphasize the word most and come back to that. And I don't mean like I'm ignoring them or they're there. They're just truly gone. When I say most, throughout the day, there can be like minor triggers. It could be a loud noise. It could be some comment someone has made that stirs up a part. And there'll be like a little ghost of one of those sensations, like a little dizziness goes blip. and it lasts for maybe a minute and at a low frequency, but there's no fear attached to it. And it's hard to describe, but it's almost like become a different part of my interoception. It's like if I feel a tiny bit of dizziness, my first go-to reaction is, oh, that last comment that I heard, that stirred up something in me. What did it stir up? It's kind of interesting. I almost use it as a tool now. So I've heard Joella in her interview talk about the long tail. I think I'm on the long tail of the sensations are usually gone, and I still have triggers. I still have a healthy, nervous system. I always did, even through NCD. I had a healthy one before I had a healthy one. I still have triggers. I still have emotions. Things still churn up, but they don't last. They just come and go.
Yeah.
So I hope that's clear to someone who's wondering where I am right now. So
right.
I don't hesitate doing anything because I already know this has happened so many hundreds of times. And if something triggers me, the sensations will come and they'll go. Just real quick, minute, 2 minutes.
And they're a ghost of what they were before, you said.
Right.
And, I have a little theory about the long tail of recovery. I personally think that most likely what you're experiencing is well within the realm of normal sensation. Mm-hmm. You're just more apt to notice them right now because you were noticing them, big time, very loudly for a long time. Because I use myself as an experiment a lot now. I always have, but especially nowadays, I use myself as the control person. Like, okay, I'm not dealing with neural circuit dizziness. So like, what am I experiencing? And I shared a story recently where I was walking on an incline treadmill, which is, by the way, not a preferred activity of mine, but it was something that I just wanted to try doing. I was like, I think this will be an interesting way to do zone 2 cardio or whatever it was. And I got off that treadmill and I was walking on marshmallows big time. And like the room was it felt like I was like moving faster than the room was, if that makes sense. Like there was a delay in the room versus where I was. It's hard to describe. It lasted, I don't even know how long it lasted because I didn't care. It was just kind of like, oh, that's an interesting sensation. Oh, what was I thinking about again? And by the time I thought to notice it again, it was gone. That's normal. And then when I mentioned my 7-year-old very recently in this conversation the other day when she was throwing cards at me. These are things that happen in our home, Ron. She was throwing cards at me, Uno cards. They happened to be Uno cards. I had my vision like shake for a minute. Like it was like it vibrated for just a second. And I was like, again, I only notice these things because I'm trying to deliberately notice them to share with people. But I think that having very momentary, weird body sensations in response to strong emotions or strong physical triggers is completely normal. It's not at all abnormal. I think that people who are recovering from neural circuit dizziness are just way more aware of those things than they were before. And that's not even necessarily a bad thing when it means something different like it does to you. It doesn't need to be the point of complete apathy. It can be, oh, that's a reminder, right? Something is happening. What can I, does it need my attention? So I think what happens in that tail is that over time, the residual vigilance toward the symptoms just fades away. And then you don't even notice them anymore. But I think what you describe, let's put it this way, it no longer meets the diagnostic criteria for any of the conditions that you mentioned. Let's put it that way. So, yeah. So, Ron, I usually end these interviews by asking people if there's anything they'd like to say to people who are suffering right now. I feel like you've said so many useful things that it's almost redundant to ask you that. But is there any final words of wisdom or hope that you want to share with people who are watching?
maybe what I'm kind of the affirmations that I'm using right now. They started from the very first day when you talk about being a B minus student. I use this affirmation of light touch, loose grip, of whatever it means to you. But being a B minus student is a light touch. Allowing yourself to walk, to amble is a light touch. Loose grip can mean, to me, is expectations. What am I assuming about my diagnosis? Do I have to hold on to that as tightly as I was? My recovery, is it happening at the right speed? Do I have, loose grip? So those two have been useful. They've just allowed me to feel better. And I think that's just an important thing. So I would just encourage that those have been useful to me.
Beautiful. Thank you. Excellent advice. Excellent advice. Ron, it has been an absolute privilege, not just this conversation, but I have learned so much from you. I learn from everyone who I encounter in this neural circuit dizziness world. I absorb the collective wisdom of everyone who kind of goes through this. I have learned so much from you, and it has been such an honor. You've made me a much better practitioner, and I encourage people to listen and then re-listen to this interview. The things that you said are basically everything that I'm trying to teach people how to do.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that you taught me these things.
I'm pretty sure you taught them to yourself, but I put them on your radar. Yeah, I put them on your radar. And I gave some ideas about how you might think about the material. Yeah, you did a lot of work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And everyone, thanks to all of you for sticking with us. I still have to decide if we're going to make this a 2-part interview or just one. We'll figure it out. I may just put this out as a whole and say, enjoy 2 hours. Anyway, if you are still with us, please be sure to like this video. If you're here on YouTube, please comment. Let us know what you thought. Please ask questions. You can also subscribe to my channel. That is helpful. That helps me reach more people. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you can also subscribe or follow the podcast and leave a high 5-star rating. These things also help me reach more people. Again, thank you for sticking with us. Thank you, Ron. And we will talk to you again soon. Take care. Bye, everyone.